Welcome and thanks for joining me. I just released yesterday my 2017 TBR for nonfiction, and I'm thrilled today to release my fiction choices for 2017 on my TBR. So I wanted to just start out with just a little more explanation. I kind of went into why I do a TBR yesterday, but I kind of wanted to expand that a little bit. I don't think that my way is necessarily the only way or the right way or even the best way to read, but I found in 2016 that actually having a list defined of books that I really want to read that year really helped me keep on track. I sort of liken it to going to the supermarket. Let's say I had $50 to spend on groceries, and I could go into a supermarket and sort of impulse buy and randomly buy things. But then, I don't know that I would get the best bang for my buck doing that. And so I'll sort of liken that to reading, where, I have a limited amount of time to read. So I figure this year I'm targeting to read 35 books. That's at a minimum. I have read, many more in a given year, and some years I've actually read less, but I have X amount of time to read. And so if I'm reading one thing, that means I'm not reading another. And so in my history, I have, read things as they occurred to me to read, and then I found that I actually wasn't getting around to other things that I had put on my list, or I had samples downloaded, or other things that I found interesting. I found, I wasn't expanding my genres, and I wasn't reading across genres and different points of view. I was sticking to kind of what's fun and easy for me. So anyway, the TBR, that's sort of how the TBR was born in 2016, and I'm really going to stick with it for 2017. As I mentioned in my nonfiction video, I did wind up with an even 15 nonfiction works and a 15 fiction works. That was a complete coincidence. That was just it just happened that way. But I think that's pretty balanced. And in my fiction works, I have a pretty good, I think, variety of different things. So let's get to it. The first book I intend on reading in 2017, the rest of my choices, both fiction and nonfiction, will be just random, so they won't go in the order that I'm presenting them now, except for this book, which I do plan on reading first. And it is a little larger than the entire universe, selected poems by Fernando Pessoa. So the first book that I read in 2016 was actually The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa, and I absolutely loved it. I will link to it in the comments. So I really wanted to start out my 2017 with some more Pessoa. Fernando Pessoa was a Portuguese poet who wrote mostly in the early 20th century. I think he died in like 1935. His works did not come to us in English until like the 1980s. And this poetry, I could spend the entire this video chat talking about Fernando Pessoa, because he's such a remarkable person. It's one of those. The Book of Disquiet was one of those works where every couple of paragraphs I was gasping, either because it was so profound or it was so beautiful. So I'm hoping that this book of poetry is similar, and so that's what I'm going to read, number one. The next books are not in order. I could read them in any kind of given order, so they're not really. This is not the order I'm going to read them, but the next book on the list actually is Born on a Tuesday by L. Nathan John. This is a Nigerian writer, and this book came recommended to me from the BookTube channel of Neil Griffiths, who does a lot of literary type videos and reviews, and so I get a lot of good ideas, and I really enjoy his channel, and that's where I heard about this book. It is a story about a young boy in Nigeria who is a sort of a street boy, I guess. And he grows up sort of just trying to make his way in the world, and then he winds up getting confronted with some religious extremism, and he has to choose then what kind of person he wants to be, what kind of Muslim he wants to be. It just sounds like a really engaging work. It was nominated, if not won, a couple of awards. So I am anxious to give this a go. So the next book on my list is Too Like the Lightning. Too Like the Lightning by Ada Palmer. This is part of a trilogy, what is going to be a trilogy. The second work will actually be released next year. I saw a YouTube video of this author, Ada Palmer, and I will link to it in the comments. She seems like a complete and total nerd. And Ada Palmer, if you're watching this, I mean that in every good way possible. So once I saw her, I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to read this woman's book because she sounded so interesting. This world sounds really, really interesting. It's set in the 25th century, and there is the world is such that people can live anywhere. There's a lot of freedom in that regard, but then the society also, because with any sort of thing, there are trade-offs. And so this society, in order to keep stable, has very strict censorship laws. And then in the mix, there is a senseier, a person who is a spiritual advisor. Religion itself has been outlawed worldwide due to some sort of historical event. And then the other main character is a convict who has been sentenced to roam the world in service to others, because that is what convicts do in this world. And then there is, of course, something happens that could upset the balance of power, and upset the balance of this society, disrupt the balance of the society, and that is what the story is about. So that sounds super duper good. Can't wait to get into that. The next book that I have on my list is called The Three-Body Problem by Liu Cixin, or Cixin Liu. It's translated by Ken Liu, who I will discuss a bit more in a moment. But I read The Wandering Earth by Liu Cixin this year. I will link to that video chat in the comments. This work, he's a science fiction author, a Chinese science fiction author, and this work takes place part in the past during the Cultural Revolution, where some scientists sent out some messages to space, and now they have actually been received, and there is an alien civilization that is going to invade Earth, and the book explores that and the different reactions that take place around the world with this impending invasion, with some who want to collaborate and some who think the world is corrupt and needs to be taken over by aliens, and others who want to resist. So this sounds really good. This has won lots of awards. I believe it won a Hugo Award. It's part of a trilogy as well, so if this turns out good, I will be reading the other two at some point, either next year or later. So the next book on the list is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. So this year, 2016, I actually read Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. So this is kind of a meaning of life, altering, changing consciousness type of book, just like Steppenwolf. I also read by Hermann Hesse, I read a book called The Glass-Bead Game, I think for which he won the Nobel Peace Prize, or not the Nobel Peace Prize, but the Nobel Prize for Literature. I did not love The Glass-Bead Game. Maybe I need to reread that, though, because I did really like Steppenwolf, and so I'm really anxious to get going with Siddhartha at some point. This is the story of a young Siddhartha who leaves his family to go for a life of contemplation, but then becomes restless and leaves that and becomes immersed in the world of fleshly delights, and then after that, goes on a quest for self-awareness, and that's the story that is told here. So the next thing I'm going to read on the list is The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. This is translated by Sheila Fisher. I am going to read a modern English version, although I do plan on referring back to the Middle English and try to read them also in Middle English as I go through the tales, or at least compare the two. I read the mini biography of Geoffrey Chaucer this year, 2016. I will link to that in the comments, and I promised myself at that time I would read the Canterbury Tales because I don't know a lot about them except for what I experienced in high school, and that was a very long time ago. So I'm looking forward to that. So the next book on the list is Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. So this book was mentioned in another book that I read this year called Give Peace a Chance. It wasn't called Give Peace a Chance. It was called The Glorious Art of Peace. So I will, and so it sounded really good. This is a story where this is a privileged young prince who does something he regrets. He seeks to, to try to make amends for that, and in the process, he realizes his privileged position and discovers all the oppression and injustice in his society, and that this book explores his his awakening to the greater world of oppression around him and his privileged position. So that sounds really good. It's not one of Leo Tolstoy's more famous works, but I did choose to pick it, which is kind of odd because in my nonfiction works, I'm actually reading Give War and Peace a Chance, which is Tolstoyan wisdom, I guess around War and Peace, but this Resurrection I had already decided and added it to my TBR based on the Glorious Art of Peace reference earlier, so I decided to stick with that. So the next book on my list is The Sellout by Paul Beatty. This is a satirical work. It's a satire of American society. This won the Man Booker Prize this year, 2016. This was the first time I think that American author won it. The character in this book, it's a satire, but he finds himself in front of the Supreme Court for trying to reinstate slavery and segregation. So it's supposed to be very funny and engaging, and I thought that it could be a good companion to the book on the history of racial ideas that I also have on my nonfiction TBR. So that's going to be coming up in 2017 as well. The next book on my list is called Zone. This is by Matthias Eynard, and it's translated by Charlotte Mandel. This is a French novel. This also came, I heard about this novel also from the Neil Griffiths BookTube channel. I will put a link to his channel in the comments. So this story, this is it all takes place on a train ride one night in this character's life, who has spent the last 15 years in the secret service of the secret intelligence services of France, apparently, and with his zone, quote unquote, was the Mediterranean, and he is on his way on this train ride to sell a briefcase full of information about the violent incidents that have occurred in his zone, and then he sort of hopes to redeem himself because he's been complicit in a lot of this violence. And so this also got really good reviews and won some prizes in France, and so won some literary prizes. So I am really looking forward. It sounds like it could be kind of intense. It is supposed to be a single sentence, so it's one of these modernist novels that's the whole thing is one single sentence. So I've never read, I've heard of these kind of novels. I don't think I've ever read one that's one single sentence, so this should be, sounds like it might be intense, but I'm going to give it a go. So the next book I have on my list is called The Bones of Grace by Tahmima Amam. This book came recommended to me by a Tasmanian friend of mine on social media, and this is actually book 3 of a trilogy, but apparently it can stand alone and actually kind of serves as even a prequel to the other 2, so I don't feel bad reading the third one first. This author is from Bangladesh. She's a Bangladeshi author. And the story takes place where there's this Bangladeshi character. She is a paleontologist and she is Harvard educated. And she comes from a wealthy Bangladeshi family. She marries who her family wants her to marry, but then she needs to leave right as she's leaving to go study the walking whale paleontology, ancient skeleton in Pakistan. She kind of meets another guy, and so it's a love story, I think, and it is her sort of struggle with identity and tradition and this type of thing. So it sounded really good to me, so I'm looking forward to delving in that. Love stories aren't my typical thing, but I have been known to enjoy them, so I'm hoping that this is one of them that I do. All right, the next book that I'm going to read is called Who Fears Death by Nettie Okorafor. So that's not a very good cover, but I read the Book of Phoenix, which was a prequel to Who Fears Death. Nnedi Okorafor is I think she's a Nigerian American. Her parents were Nigerian, so this is a post-apocalyptic book that's set in Africa. Post-apocalypse books I can love or not love. This one sounds really cool because it's sort of a fantasy science fiction, more of a fantasy. She has magical powers. She can shapeshift. There are beings of folklore, from African folklore and mythology. These characters and sort of creatures from that are there. So it sounds like a really interesting. She goes on a quest ultimately to. It sounds like it might be kind of a revenge quest, but it does sound really good. And after I read the Book of Phoenix, I had promised myself I would read Who Fears Death. So this is on my list for 2017. So the next book I have on my list is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Mrs. Dalloway, this is a classic book published in 1925 originally. I have never read it, although this book, it's a standing joke with me and some of my friends is that the universe wants me to read Mrs. Dalloway. This book comes across my path all the time in used bookstores, at book fairs, whatever. The last time I saw it, I said, okay, Mrs. Dalloway, I'm going to read you in 2017. So I have Mrs. Dalloway on my list. This is it was a groundbreaking novel of its time. It is the internal world of a woman getting ready, a single day in the life of this woman, Mrs. Dalloway, as she's preparing for a party that she is going to host at her home, is my understanding. So, it's by Virginia Woolf. They made a movie, The Hours, out of this book that I have not seen. So this will all be new to me. The next book I have on my list is another sort of classic book. Classic in the world of sci-fi. It is called The Stone That Never Came Down by John Brunner. So this is a British science fiction work from 1973, I think, and it sounds really interesting. It's a dystopia of a dystopic Britain of the future, where the society's violent. There's religious extremism, income inequality. Sound familiar? Yeah, and ultimately science develops a pill, a medication that people can take that will erase their prejudices and give them empathy for their fellow humans. And so therefore, or give them empathy. I'm not sure if it's just for humans. It may include also animals, non-humans, but it has the potential to change the world. So what would we do if we were presented with something like that? So, of course, the society resists this change. So I heard about this on the channel Final Blow Joe. So Joe reviewed this on his channel. I'll put a link to that. It came recommended by him and it sounded really interesting. So I decided to read it this year. Then I wanted to read a couple of novellas. I read, last year I had a novella on my list. So this year I thought I would do the same. I ended up picking, this is Hear the Wind Sing and Pinball 1973. This is two novellas by Haruki Murakami. It's not a TBR to me if I don't have a Murakami book on it. And so here I have two of his first works, actually. So he did not like these works, and he resisted having them translated into English, but ultimately they get mixed reviews, but I'm really thrilled to read his first two published works, and so I can't wait to get into those. And then the last book I have on my list, I chose a short story collection, The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories by Ken Liu. Ken Liu is the person who translated The Three-Body Problem by Lucy Shin that I mentioned earlier. This collection, this short story collection, many of these stories have won awards and been published elsewhere. I've never read any of his works, so all of these are going to be new to me. I can't wait to get in them. He is a Chinese American. He brings that experience to his writing, so it should be a fresh perspective, and I can't wait to get into it. So I am going to close with that. This chat, this unveiling of my TBR lasted longer than I had planned, but there's a lot of to talk about with these books. I will be doing I will be doing chats after I complete each of these in the year of 2017, so stay tuned for that. Take care. Bye.